Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into the fascinating science and the deep philosophy behind how human beings actually change their minds. And to help us navigate this somewhat tricky topic, we're going to use a little animal fable throughout, guided by our very observant, very patient protagonist, Professor Paws. Because, let's be honest, if anyone truly understands how hard it is to get a stubborn creature to change directions, it's a cat. So let's unlock the secrets of effective communication together.
Okay, let's dive into this. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever presented just undeniable, rock-solid facts to someone only to watch them completely double down on their totally wrong belief? It is literally one of the most relatable and frankly frustrating experiences we all go through. You lay out the pure logic, you hand them the evidence, and instead of agreeing, they just dig their paws in deeper. Why on earth does our brain do this? Well, that's exactly the core problem we're going to solve today.
Here's our roadmap for figuring this out today. We're going to cover, first, the dilemma of persuasion. Second, the backfire effect. Third, cognitive dissonance. Then we'll look at classical rhetoric, Socratic questioning, and finally wrap up with effective communication strategies. Let's get right to it.
Part 1, the dilemma of persuasion. So we've all been taught this huge myth, right? The idea that logic and cold hard data are all you need to win an argument. But neuroscientist Tali Sharot reveals in her book, The Influential Mind, that our brains simply don't operate like rational computers. Instead, we're fundamentally wired to defend our established identities and our prior beliefs. When we encounter new information, our brains don't just objectively process those facts. We filter absolutely everything through the lens of who we already are. If a new piece of data threatens our identity, our brain acts like a loyal guard cat, instinctively swatting that fact right out of the air.
Check out this wild study from Yale Law School. Researchers gave people data to analyze. When the data was about a totally neutral topic like a new cream for a skin rash, people with high math skills logically analyzed it and, of course, got the right answer. But when that exact same mathematical data was presented as being about a highly controversial political topic like gun control, the results totally flipped. People with high intelligence actually used their advanced brain power to twist the numbers and rationalize their pre-existing political beliefs, which led to incredibly inaccurate analysis. So, higher intelligence doesn't actually make you more objective, it just makes you way better at arguing for what you already believe.
Moving on to Section 2, the backfire effect.
This brings us to a phenomenon that perfectly explains why simply dumping facts on someone completely fails. Enter the backfire effect. This is a cognitive bias where facing contrary evidence actually causes people to reject that new information and strengthen their original incorrect belief. Think of it like trying to put out a grease fire by throwing a bucket of water on it. It just explodes. To our brains, contrary evidence feels like a literal physical attack on our identity. When our deeply held beliefs are challenged with raw facts, our natural psychological defense mechanisms kick in, and we just retreat deeper into our original stance to protect ourselves.
Section 3, cognitive dissonance. Okay, let's look at how we try to escape the psychological pain of being wrong. Back in 1957, psychologist Leon Festinger conducted this absolute classic experiment. He had students do an incredibly boring task, and then asked them to lie to the next participant and say it was actually really fun. He paid one group $20 to lie, and another group just $1. The counterintuitive outcome? The group paid $20 knew exactly why they lied. For the money, no internal conflict. But the $1 group? They experienced massive cognitive dissonance. Their brains just couldn't handle the discomfort of lying for basically no reward. So, to relieve that stress, their brains subconsciously changed their internal belief, convincing themselves that the boring task was actually fun. Crazy, right?
Festinger also looked into this fascinating doomsday cult called the Seekers, who genuinely believed a UFO would rescue them from an apocalyptic flood on December 21, 1954. Now, when midnight came and went and no UFO arrived, you'd think they would just admit they were wrong, right? No way. The cognitive dissonance was just too painful. Instead, they embraced a massive new rationalization. They convinced themselves that their pure faith had actually convinced the aliens to spare the Earth. It's a brilliant, if extreme, illustration of how far our minds will go to protect our core beliefs from the painful truth of being wrong.
Which brings us to Section 4, classical rhetoric. So, if dumping facts just triggers a backfire, what did ancient thinkers know that we've somehow forgotten today?
Well, today we often rely heavily on modern justification. We think cold, rational public reason is enough, but classical persuasion understood human nature so much better. Aristotle knew that true persuasion requires ethos, which is like the trust within a pack of animals, and pathos, a real emotional connection, before you can ever introduce logos or logic. You absolutely cannot skip the emotion and the trust and just expect the logic to do all the heavy lifting.
This beautifully ties into some wisdom from the ancient Greek thinker Protagoras, who noted that in every question there are two sides to the argument exactly opposite to one another. He stressed the vital importance of truly looking at both sides and, crucially, knowing your specific audience. If you don't understand the emotional and personal perspective of the person you're talking to, all the abstract facts in the world just aren't going to help you persuade them.
Section 5.
Socratic question. All right, so how do we actually put this ancient empathy into practice? Well, we use one of the most powerful philosophical tools ever created, one that is actually heavily used in modern cognitive behavioral therapy today to bypass our brain's defensive walls. Socratic questioning isn't about telling someone they're wrong. It's about acting as a patient guide, asking structured questions that allow them to explore their own mind. You ask questions to clarify their assumptions. You gently ask them to examine their own evidence. You prompt them to consider alternative viewpoints and evaluate the consequences of their beliefs. By acting as a guide rather than an opponent, you help them find the truth themselves, which is infinitely more effective and way less threatening than lecturing them.
And finally, Section 6, Effective Communication Strategies. Now let's bring all this incredible science and philosophy together into some actual actionable solutions. Consider this fascinating study from North Shore University Hospital regarding hand-washing compliance among medical staff. First, they installed cameras and warned staff about the severe dangers of not washing their hands. A classic stick approach. It completely failed. Compliance stayed terribly low. Then they switched to the carrot. They put up an electronic board that gave immediate positive feedback and a rising score every single time someone washed their hands. Guess what? Compliance skyrocketed to 90%. Our brains are highly motivated by positive rewards and shared goals, not by threats and loss of control.
Researchers at UCLA and the University of Illinois saw a very similar thing when working with parents who are hesitant about vaccines due to myths. When doctors tried to directly debunk the myth, the parents just dug in deeper. That's the backfire effect in action. But when doctors changed strategies and instead focused entirely on a shared motivation, the undeniable desire to keep their child healthy, and emphasized the common ground of preventing deadly diseases, the parents became much more open. Finding a shared goal is just far more effective than trying to violently uproot a false belief.
So to wrap up our ultimate actionable takeaways for navigating literally any difficult argument, number 1, never attack directly. It just triggers cognitive dissonance. Number 2, use Socratic questions to let them do the thinking. Number 3, find the carrot, the common ground, and that shared motivation. And number 4, always give them a face-saving, graceful way to change their mind without feeling like they've lost their identity. And that brings us to the end of today's explainer. We've traveled all the way from the stubborn wiring of our modern brains back to the open forums of ancient Greece. So, I leave you with this final thought. The next time you find yourself barking loudly just to win an argument, pause and ask yourself, do you just want the emotional satisfaction of being right, or do you actually want to change their mind? Thanks so much for joining me, and keep asking the good questions.
Knowledge grows through sharing. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe as we continue to grow together.